Yeah, this one.
If you grew up during the 90s or the
Chat,
early
is it
2000s,
actual
there's an
influence or
extremely
not?
high
I
chance
want to
that
know
you
more about
watched some
this.
of Dan Schneider's shows. It was like impossible to avoid him. It'd be like trying to dodge raindrops during a thunderstorm. Dan Schneider during this period was the king of children's television programs. He made some of the most
Guys,
influential
don't reach up and anything. It's 4 hours long and it's on a website, so I can't really fucking watch that. I'm gonna get DMCA'd or some shit. Like, they're gonna cut my cheeks raw.
productions like Drake and Josh, The Amanda Show, iCarly. His resume is just stacked with tons of shows that I imagine meant a lot to many of you growing up. And make no mistake, you meant a lot to the creator of these shows as well. Well, not so much you, but your feet certainly did. The creator of these shows is a monstrous foot fetishist, Dan Get in the Van Schneider. He is a vile, creepy, disgusting human being, and this has been known for years. However, a new docuseries just dropped really diving into this subject matter and putting a spotlight on it in a way that hasn't previously been explored. It's called Quiet on Set. Now, if you don't know what Dan looks like, here's a nice picture of him here. He looks like he was made in the Dragon's Dogma 2 character creator. And Dan Schneider has become the face of Quiet on Set. However, it actually explores more than that. It's like a whole deep look at all of the horrible things that were going on during these Nickelodeon productions. It's more than just Dan, but he obviously plays a central role here because he made these shows. He was the head honcho of most of this. And he was well aware of some of these terrible and downright criminal things that were going on behind the scenes on some of these shows. And the reason I mention the foot fetishism off rip here is because that was one of the first things that people really caught on to in the public eye. After Dan's glory days at Nickelodeon, people started to pick up on how odd it was that a lot of these children's shows had an emphasis on feet. Pretty frequently, it was a common thread throughout a lot of these shows, like feet humor and having these child actors and actresses displaying their feet. And in 2013, one of the shows Dan worked on, Sam and Cat, actually ran a competition where kids were supposed to submit pictures of their feet to them. Like, that's weird. No matter how you spin it, that's a really weird thing to request from your audience of children, to take pictures of their feet for you. That's just downright creepy and wrong. I can't believe that tweet is still up, by the way, over a decade later, and no one thought to delete that. That is impressive. But anyway, people started to pick up on Dan's fixation with stompers, and it seemed like his fetish was bleeding into his work, and he was having the children unknowingly participate in it by having them display their feet. That's what it seemed to a lot of people, so it was obviously very concerning, so people did more and more digging. They found more and more evidence of Dan being an awful piece of shit behind the scenes with a lot of shady things going on there, and it just led to this reputation that people for years have known that Dan blows loads to toes Schneider is not a good person. And now Quiet on the Set has released, and so much information has come out, not just about Dan, but about that entire Nickelodeon workplace around these child stars. Arguably the largest piece of new information that dropped during this docuseries was the sexual abuse of Drake.
I'm just confused on how they can get away with stuff for so long, though. I understand how things work, and I get it. You know, there was even something like the Me Too movement that was created because people were like impossible to take down, right? Right? You guys say money, right? But there seemed to be an overwhelming amount here.
Drake Bell by someone named Brian Peck. So Brian Peck was a coach at Nickelodeon whom was sexually abusing Drake Bell, and he was actually convicted in 2004. He spent 16 months in the slammer, and then immediately upon release, landed a job with Disney. If that doesn't show just how rotten to the core this industry is, I don't know what will. There is deep-seated evil in Hollywood. He went to jail for lewd acts with a minor. He is a sex offender, a convicted sex offender, and he immediately got a Disney Channel job working on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. What the fuck? That's mind-bogglingly evil. Like that's not just irresponsible, that's malicious. It's not like they just made some kind of mistake where they put a sex offender in a role where he works almost exclusively with children. It's not like they made a whoopsie-daisy, they just happened to overlook that he's a sex offender. They knew. They would have to know, and they still hired him for that role regardless. That's scary. That's terrifying. They're actively enabling
I mean, dude, chat, when you're on those lists, chat, isn't that like impossible to get jobs like almost anywhere, dude? But then to get a job at a pretty high position at Disney, I mean, dude, of course they knew. I mean,
fucking sex offender to potentially prey on more children. Drake also described that when he went into court, Brian Peck had the support of some very powerful and familiar faces. There were 41 character letters written to the judge asking for leniency for Brian Peck. 41 letters of support from industry personnel that were trying to get a lighter sentence for Brian Peck, even knowing...
I wonder how I would feel as a judge, chat. Guys, of course I'm not a judge, okay? But just as a person, this shit would annoy the fuck out of me. That, like, you're trying to do your job and trying to provide justice, and some people are just sending some fucking bullshit-ass letters of the display of character that I didn't ask for.
Report from
like, fuck you
industry
guys,
personnel that were trying to get a lighter sentence for Brian Peck, even knowing that he is guilty of the crimes for which he is about to face the punishment, asking for a more generous sentence. These weren't just 41 pieces of toilet paper with nonsensical scribblings on it from nobodies. These were 41 character letters that were submitted by industry personnel, some of whom were high up on the food chain, so these things carried weight. And they're advocating for someone who is guilty of sexually abusing a child. Holy shit. They just viewed it as not a big deal, I guess. Listen, Judge, I understand Brian Peck diddled a child. Who at Nickelodeon hasn't? Are you really gonna throw him away or put him away and throw away the key for that? What about season 3 of Drake and Josh? What actually matters here? Let's think about that. Like, this is crazy to me. It almost stops being surprising learning that Brian Peck landed a job at Disney right after his 16 months in prison for this crime, because it seems like that entire industry just does not give a fuck about the safety of kids to begin with. So like I said, Quiet on Set isn't just about Dan Schneider and all of the awful things that he has done. It's about how awful that entire industry itself is. But once again, Dan Schneider does still play a large role in this docuseries, highlighting the bad workplace and environment that he would cultivate, the weird shit that would go on in like the writer's room and the way he'd treat some people, just a whole plethora of different bad stuff. And in response to all of this, Dan Schneider himself actually stepped out from the shadows, leaving his little gopher's hidey hole and addressing it head on in one of the most painfully scripted and staged apology video interviews I've ever seen.
Hey, it's Boogie. I played T-Bo on Nickelodeon's iCarly. I got a chance to watch the Quiet on Set program, and I reached out to Dan to see if it was something that he'd be willing to discuss. I'm pleased to say that he said yes. Dan, how are you?
I'm okay.
I wonder if you'd be pleased to discuss this with the police. No, is there not like charges and stuff that's like like reportable or whatever? Isn't there like victims of this shit, motherfucker? Like,
the interview is not conducted by a professional. It's conducted by a former actor in one of Dan Schneider's shows, and he is not equipped to handle something like this. This is the biggest load of baloney. Like, this is just some straight up fucking malarkey. There is no pushback from Boogie on anything in this interview at all. It's just strategic softballs designed to give Dan Schneider some kind of sympathetic PR win here, where he comes out of this looking better, where he comes out of this like not the bad guy. It's so deplorable that they'd even try something like this with a straight face. I think it is extremely transparent what this is, and I'm happy to say pretty much everyone saw straight through this. This did not give Dan Schneider the dunk I think he was expecting it to. This did not make him look any better in the public's eye. It actually just made it look even more sinister that he was able to, it seems, pre-prepare this interview to mitigate the potential fallout from the docuseries airing.
Let's talk about the massages.
Okay.
Watching the content yesterday, it was disturbing.
It was wrong. It was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. It was the wrong thing to do. I'd never do it today. I'm embarrassed that I did it then. I apologize to anybody that I ever put in that situation.
Dan, talk to me about the writer's room.
Dude, what a scripted dog shit, dude. Just the way, I mean, dude, I hate to overanalyze this, but just the way the dialogue went, like, it wasn't even done with, like, saying what he was saying it, but then he stopped, because he knew it was going to get interrupted, and then this guy goes on to, like, oh, yeah, I really wanted to apologize about this, like.
Ever put in that situation.
Dan, talk to me about the writer's room. From what I saw, not cool.
No, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if I can cut right to the chase, let me just say, no writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room, ever, period, the end, no excuses.
It starts with what's supposed to be this moment of taking accountability. Dan Schneider's just point blank apologizing and, holding himself accountable.
Jack, how do you feel about shooting somebody with a gun at point blank and doing a double murder? It's not cool. It's not cool. It shouldn't have happened.
For the sins of the past type vibe.
Fuck?
Except he's really not. Like, these aren't things that you just, hand wave away with, a simple apology. A lot of what was reported is, unforgivable bad shit. There's really no way of apologizing for the things that Dan Schneider has done and also been accused of. So it's just, it feels so fucking insincere. And Dan Schneider got away with it, and it seems will continue to get away with it. So he loses nothing by doing something like this, which just makes it frustrating to see him parade around pretending like he cares now all of a sudden. It's extremely easy for him to just be like, oh yeah, that was bad. I feel bad for that. Oh, what a regret. Yep, not good. It's just, I would have liked if the interviewer was someone that would legitimately dive into a lot of these things and actually press him on a lot of these things. This interview never...
Chat, if the documentary is 4 hours long, there's a lot of materials in there. There's a lot of stuff that he has to talk about, and there's stuff to press him on, no? 4 hours? There's no way this is a 4-hour documentary about, him and his fucking daily lunch schedule or something.
Even addresses the things that people want to hear from Dan on, such as the sexualization of the children in those shows. Even outside of all the foot stuff, Dan included some very inappropriate things in his programs, such as Ariana Grande milking a potato, and then another scene with her getting splashed with water and shit. All of it was very unacceptable and seems to sexualize the child actors and actresses in his productions. And that was never even brought up in this interview. So this interview it doesn't have any real substance to it. It is legitimately just a scripted PR play from Dan.
I cut it. I want my shows to be popular. I want everyone to like it. The more people who like the shows, the happier I am.
Yeah.
So if there's anything in a show that needs to be cut because it's upsetting somebody, let's cut it.
So I think it's big for you to say with your work, if it's viewed as that today, you don't have a problem.
Cut it. Cut it.
That's a solution.
The last thing I want to ever do is put any content in a show that's going to upset my audience and make them want to turn off the TV. Why would I ever want to do that?
That makes sense.
This was him addressing a question that Boogie asked about inappropriate jokes in there without getting too deep into the weeds, just a broad subject of some of these jokes have aged poorly and people look at them as inappropriate for a child audience. How do you respond? The most softball way of asking this question might...
Well, it's just now that we know more about the person who wrote those, it just tarnishes memories. It's not something you can actively fight against or whatever. That's just a collateral, right? All the things you think about when you were young, now it all kind of makes sense. Oh, Jesus Christ, this is kind of disgusting. And that, you just can't take that back.
And his response was, cut it. Just get rid of it. I don't want it in the show. If it's aged bad and it makes people uncomfortable or, this and that, cut it. And Boogie's patting him on the back for it, oh my goodness, wow. That's so benevolent. What a great solution. Yeah, that makes sense. What the fuck? It's so easy for him to say that now, but it doesn't take away the fact that you filmed it. If you cut Ariana Grande milking a potato type shit, if you cut some of the foot stuff that you included in there, it doesn't change the fact that you still had the child actors and actresses doing that shit and were sexualizing them. It still happened. That's still bad. Cutting it from the final product doesn't erase what you did. It's so frustrating that there's no pushback on any of this in the interview. He just gets to let him say his piece and then get applause for it. It's so stupid.
And when Drake and I talked and he told me...
Oh, okay, let me guess. And then if this was a legal thing, they had the legal defense of saying, oh, dude, the foot fetish has nothing to do with what's going on set. It's just a coincidence type thing, and then there's a lot of plausible deniability, and you just get away with it, right?
What had happened, I was more devastated by that than anything that ever happened to me in my career thus far. 41 of those people wrote letters for Peck, character letters, praising him for who he was and asking for leniency, and they knew that he was guilty. They knew he had confessed to some degree, and they still did this. But Drake's mom, a lovely woman who I stay in contact with this day, she came to me at the time and she said, "Would you help me with my speech for the judge?" And I said, "Of course." And I did.
Dan Schneider's fishing for the Nickelodeon's Kid Choice Award for the best fake crying. It feels super forced and super insincere. Him tearing up while talking about this story. This is him talking about the Drake and Brian Peck case, where he mentions 41 people wrote those letters and it baffled him. And then Drake's mom actually asked him to help her write her piece, which he did. And that leads me to a question of, if you knew all this, why didn't you back up Drake Bell? The way it's described, Brian Peck had all of these people in his corner, but Drake really only had his...
it's because of dependency, right? People are dependent on him and the success of his whatever he's doing, right? Because of money or like survival at that point, yeah?
Mom and his brother. Why weren't...
That's always going to be a one-sided relationship. Or am I wrong?
You more involved than... Like, I imagine that could have been extraordinarily helpful. But regardless, this interview doesn't do anything to change my perception of Dan Schneider or anyone else's, really, I imagine, because it's still nothing. This isn't really an interview. It's just a PR piece disguised as an interview. It's just more despicable garbage here. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to talk about this a little bit. Again, the docuseries is called Quiet on Set. It's out now. And yeah, just kind of wanted to go over it a little bit. That's it.
Interesting chat. Fuck, I kind of want to know more about it, but it's gonna be hard to find a video that's like kind of correlates with it.